We're continuing to explore the love stories of Black women in excellence, learning how they reach levels of success and notoriety and how their love stories are interwoven in that is just truly fascinating to me, and I'm sure you as well. So I am so excited to tell you about the love story of Ursula Burns, the first Black woman CEO of a Fortune 500 company, Xerox. There's a lot that's been written about her, mostly around her ascent to the highest professional level within corporate America. But most aren't aware of how influential her marriage to her husband, Lloyd Bean, was to her career. We frequently see the sacrifices that the wife makes for her husband. We also see the disparities in the professional and personal priorities that ultimately lead to an undercurrent of resentment. But that is not the story of Ursula and Lloyd, and I'm going to tell you all about their love for each other, which was clearly and beautifully emanated throughout her memoir. So with that being said, you've been cordially invited to another episode of I'll Tell You What. I Will Tell You What is a podcast that's all love Black history. I Will Tell You What is presented by Hueido, and I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that can't wait to tell you these love stories every single Monday. If you have not done so yet, I highly suggest you subscribe on the Tube of Hue and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us everywhere you can, especially those apps that may be going away pretty soon. And more than anything, join us on the Treon of Pay. That's a great way for you to continuously support I Will Tell You What, while also giving you the chance to pick the love stories we cover next, and me giving you a little bit more details into these wonderful stories I love to tell you all about. So with all of that being said, let's begin the love story of Ursula Burns. Almost 30 years before she would become the CEO of Xerox, Ursula Burns would meet the man that would ultimately become her husband. The timing is around 1980. She had recently graduated from Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. As a member of the National Consortium of Graduate Education for Minority Engineers, Xerox, quote, was eager to sponsor her as she pursued her master's degree at Columbia University. But before she went to grad school, she met Lloyd. Now, Lloyd Fitzgerald Bean was, quote, an accomplished Xerox research scientist from Shelly Bay, Bermuda, that, quote, had extra rooms in his house, which Xerox rented for interns. Now, it is important to note that Lloyd is also 20 years older than Ursula and was divorced by the time they met. So along with 3 other Black interns, she stayed in his home throughout her internship. Now, it's not defined when exactly they began to date, which is quite fun because obviously that's none of our business, but I'm guessing it took place somewhere in the earlier mid-1980s. Basically, sometime after she became an intern at Xerox, but maybe sometime around when she'd actually accepted a full-time role with the organization. So Google said that in October of 1988, Ursula and Lloyd got married. Ursula said that the first time they were planning their wedding, it was supposed to take place, quote, in Olmsted's Maplewood Park among its 3,000 rose bushes. But work became the priority, so they had to try it again. They would eventually get married in Lloyd's living room in front of his daughter Marjorie, granddaughter Asia, and good friend of his. Ursula described it as, quote, a few kisses, a few photos, and the shrimp platter Marge brought. Perfect. I, too, know of someone who got married in their living room, and that worked out perfectly as well. Anywho, not long after that, something occurred that impacted not only their marriage, but Ursula's career. As an, quote, entry-level engineer making less than $30,000, Ursula was invited to attend a company meeting where she very publicly disagreed with the comments made by an executive. She did not know that the guy was an executive at the time until he told her to come into his office, where he basically checked her on checking him. But that started a professional relationship where he must have been impressed with her, because he decided to take her under his wing and make her his mentee of sorts. So that would actually lead to what happened next. Ursula was offered a role to be the executive assistant of that executive, Waylon Hicks, who was vice president at Xerox. She contemplated turning this role down because she saw it as, quote, a glorified secretarial job that would have to make her move from New York to Connecticut. And also, she had just gotten married. But she wrote that, quote, it was Lloyd who told me I would be a fool if I didn't take the job and the career opportunities that would come my way. So she took the job and left Lloyd behind in Rochester and began a long distance marriage. And then, would you know it? Another offer actually came along, a better one. So by 1991, Ursula Burns was an engineer, a wife to Lloyd, a bonus mom to Malcolm, and an executive to the number 2 of Xerox. And then the CEO of Xerox asked her to be his executive assistant. Now, y'all, she actually got that role in a manner similar to how she got the first EA position with Waylon Hicks. Now, the CEO at the time was Paul Allaire. He mentioned in a meeting how the company was experiencing hiring freezes, and Ursula checked him too. She was like, how are we freezing when we're hiring folks every single month? It must be sunny at Xerox. Now, if you couldn't tell, Ursula is very blunt and didn't really care to be politically correct with the business acumen and the order and respecting the titles of other people in the room. But ultimately, that led to Paul offering her his executive assistant role. Again, it was her husband, Lloyd, that would explain to her why this was a great opportunity. She started talking herself out of the position when he reminded her that of everyone that Paul could have asked to be in this role, he asked her. That meant something. Quote, it's up to you, of course, but I think you'd be a fool to pass it up, is what she said that he told her. So, like the last time, she accepted that role as well. Now, she learned a lot being the executive assistant to Paul and worked with him until she got pregnant in 1992. With her daughter Melissa on the way, her obstetrician, quote, ordered bed rest. She basically spent the entire third semester in the rest of the bed, and afterwards she went to work for another Xerox exec and vowed to, quote, not work on the weekends or at night until the children were in bed. Now, as much as she could, Ursula tried to maintain that, but sadly, she wouldn't be able to always. So about 2 years later, after Melissa was born, so this is around 1994, Ursula was offered to run the European arm of Xerox from London, and her entire family was able to move out there with her. They, quote, lived in a big, wonderful American-style house where Malcolm and Melissa attended schools, and Lloyd was able to maintain a research science role for Xerox. This allowed both of them to have the opportunity to take Melissa to preschool and walk with Malcolm to the bus stop every day. Life was great. Ursula also said that she enjoyed these dates and outings with Lloyd while they were out there too. They, quote, went to the horse races at Ascot. We went to Wimbledon and Oxford and Cambridge and to Scotland. They even took their children to Bath. She wrote, quote, we did all the British stuff we could and had a wonderful time. Like I said, said life was great. When they came back to Rochester, Ursula wanted to move. She wrote, quote, "We were still living in the house Lloyd had lived in with his first wife, and for me, anyway, it was old." They ended up buying a, quote, 5-bedroom, 6-bathroom, 6,000 square foot house that was originally built in England in the 1920s. So life for them was what? Yeah, you get it. But things would start to change for her and her family just a few years later in 2000. That's when she was in the vice president of global manufacturing role. Ursula wrote, quote, "I was working my tail off and loving what I was doing, but the hours were creating a nightmare at home." Ursula wasn't able to attend every game or activity that her kids had. She said, quote, "The end of the workday always prompted a flurry of phone calls with my husband to see which of us was going to pick them up and where." With her career continuing to climb, but her kids also growing up, this forced her to have a very, very tough and honest conversation with Lloyd. By 2000, Ursula was the VP of Global Manufacturing at Xerox, and the hours and demands of her job were making things very difficult to manage with her husband and children. She didn't want to, quote, outsource the raising of their kids, but didn't want to risk the momentum she was achieving with her job. This made her have a very serious conversation with Lloyd. And do you know what Lloyd told her? Ursula said that Lloyd said, quote, "I've been working at Xerox for 42 years. Why don't I retire and stay at home?" How many men do you know that are literally just going to say, "You know what, babe? You got it. Let me be the stay-at-home dad. Let me help you let your career continue to thrive. You're on a good track. You got a lot of momentum right now. Let me be the one that makes the food when you come home from a long day's work. Let me be the one to pick the kids up from the volleyball practice or the soccer practice or the basketball games or just walking at the mall or whatever the thing the kids like to do nowadays, making TikToks with their friends or something. Like, let me be the one, so when you need to stay late, when you can't make dinner, when you have to come home and continue working because you got another call you got to take at night before going to sleep for a few hours and being up and gone probably before all of us are even ready to start our days. Like, let me be here to be able to support you, babe. Let me be able to support your career. There are not a lot of men that would honestly do that. You know it. I definitely know it. And I don't care what 50 Cent said. Not many men would do this at all. I honestly don't even know what the lyrics to that song are about, but I'm pretty sure it's not about this. But regardless, you get the point. That is what we say is a good man, Savannah. Ursula wrote, quote, "It was a perfect solution for all of us, and I was grateful to him as his retirement enabled me to continue working at the career I loved." Later, she tell younger, career-driven women that the secret is, quote, "to marry someone 20 years older." And if there was any guilt in this decision regarding being there for all of her kids' extracurriculars, she would also say, quote, "You don't have to be at every volleyball game. We can't guilt ourselves." She also went to say that, like, her mom had to work a lot as well to be able to support her and her siblings, and she turned out fine. So I processed her saying that as just her basically feeling like being a great example of a parent that excels at her career, which can provide other resources and opportunities, essentially can be more impactful, or at least just as impactful as attending every single game and doing all the things, right? Now, whether you agree or disagree, that's up to you. But later, when there were a lot of changes occurring at Xerox, she contemplated taking a lateral role at Dell in Texas. Lloyd and Ursula visited Austin, looked into the school system and the neighborhoods. She said, quote, "Lloyd was okay with the job change, though neither of us was thrilled with having to move to Texas. They They grew, though, to like Austin and the prospect of living there, so she accepted the offer. However, she ended up getting a better offer at Xerox and would stay. That would lead her to working for the president of Xerox, Anne Mulcahy. When Anne eventually transitioned into the CEO position, Ursula continued to work for her and became the president of the company. So when Ursula said that she accepted that promotion, life changed even more. Quote, "I was completely unbalanced when it came to my family life, but the sacrifice was necessary for the company to survive." That, of course, would put more domestic responsibility on Lloyd to be the present parent for Malcolm and Melissa when Ursula couldn't always be. She said, quote, "I made a point of always being home over the weekends, but other than that, my husband was in charge of the household and the kids, who were then 9 and 12. Sometimes Ursula couldn't make it home when she wanted, but she was very, very appreciative of the support that she received from her husband. She said, without him, quote, "there was no way I could have delivered what Xerox needed for me." But as you could tell, Ursula put her career first to an extent, even when she had to get a hysterectomy because of how large her fibroids had grown and the location of said fibroids. So even through all of that, she continued to work, quote, "from my hospital bed and from the couch in my living room until I could return to the office." Now, for any of y'all that don't know, just a basic myomectomy, which would be a removal of the fibroids from the uterus, takes anywhere from like 3 to 6 weeks for you to recover. So the timing of recovering from a hysterectomy is around the same. Being out of pocket basically for almost 2 months is what we should be thinking here. But she kept working. So becoming the president of a Fortune 500 company meant that she had to make more public appearances. Lloyd told her, quote, "I'm not going. I'd not serve any purpose there except to be your company." He didn't want to just be, I guess, a trophy husband. But essentially, as Ursula put it, quote, "he didn't find those events stimulating or engaging." But honestly, Ursula didn't trip over it. Like, he had attended plenty of those dinners and galas and outings earlier in her career. But all that sacrifice, all those long hours, all that sweat equity that Ursula put into her career would pay off soon enough. In July 2009, Ursula became the first Black woman to become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She was able to achieve this historical professional ascent due to her education, business acumen she learned along the way, but more than anything, because of her husband Lloyd. She held that coveted position until December 2016 when she stepped down. She wanted to spend more time with her family, especially Lloyd. After Xerox, she wrote that with the kids being grown and moved out and pursuing their own educational and professional goals, she would go back and forth, quote, between New York City and London with Lloyd as they downsized from their Rochester home. They enjoyed the empty nester life together until 2019 when the worst thing happened. Ursula wrote, quote, "Lloyd died unexpectedly in January 2019. In the audible version of her memoir, you can hear the hurt in her voice as she reads her thoughts and recalls her loss, which is perhaps the first time her tone shifts from her fast-paced, matter-of-fact cadence to true emotional pain. She said, quote, "Lloyd was my absolute everything. I didn't realize how much this was true. I was totally lost, sad, angry, guilty, and more. I love Lloyd so much." She also said, quote, "He continues to be the wind beneath my wings. I wake up every day and miss him, and I go to sleep most nights thinking about him." Lloyd was preceded in death by his parents and sister, and along with Ursula, he left behind his 4 children, Marjorie, Lloyd, Malcolm, and Melissa, 1 grandchild, 2 great-grands, his brother, and other family and friends. I think, honestly, Ursula just wanted more time with Lloyd. And you know what? I can say that confidently confidently. I don't try to make a lot of assumptions on I'll Tell You What, but I feel like that's what I can really stand behind. But ultimately, her career came first, to an extent. Many women, especially Black women, do not get the opportunities that Ursula got. Or if so, there's something that prohibits them from climbing the corporate ladder. Ursula was very cognizant of the space she was in and what she could do. You know, we usually see the men put their families aside to become executives and breadwinners, as their spouses are usually either less educated or are willing to put their careers aside for the good of the family. That honestly wasn't the case with Ursula and Lloyd. I want us all to remember this correctly. He was also a very esteemed person in his 4+ decades at Xerox, as he, quote, went on to patent more inventions for Xerox than practically any other scientist in the company at the time. When he retired, it was at the culmination of a very successful career as well. He realized the heights his wife could reach and was there to support her in every way that he could. And his life is also a testament to that. Now, over 5 years after Lloyd's passing, Ursula continues to thrive, though she still has, quote, an ache in my heart. After her role at Xerox, she became the chairperson and CEO of a telecom company from 2018 to 2020. She is currently a founder of an investment firm called Integrum and is the chairwoman of Teneo, which is an executive consultancy and advisory firm. And she released her memoir, Where You Are Is Not Who You Are, in 2021. And it's a great quick read, by the way, if you want to learn and read more about her life overall, her beginnings, her professional career, her family life, all of the things. So if you couldn't tell, Ursula was never just going to like sit around and do nothing. But as I mentioned before, a lot of the success she saw in her career during her time at Xerox and even afterwards has a lot to do with who she married, her husband, Lloyd Bean. So that, Owl Runners, concludes the love story of Ursula Burns. Now, if you can tell, her love story wasn't your average I'll Tell You What story, but I absolutely loved it and felt like it's one that we should all recognize and know. We're going to continue our Black Women in Excellence series this month with another wonderful love story. So subscribe, follow, share, come back, join us on the Triana Faye. Make sure you are with I'll Tell You What everywhere you can, just in case one of those places goes away. And I will definitely see y'all in the pews.